This is the Global Travel Channel podcast show, and I am your host, Mark Philpott. Welcome to the show, everybody, and for those people that are regular listeners to the show, welcome back. It's great to have you here. Wonder how and when you listen to your podcast episodes. Do you do it while you're out walking the dog? Maybe on the commute to the office? I'd like to know. Tell me, reach out, give me a shout, tell me how you listen to the podcast show. For the people that are here for the first time, welcome aboard. Our growing community around the world now reaches 95 countries, and I appreciate every single listener out there. So I hope you enjoy all the episodes that you listen to. Don't forget, you can find them all at our website at www.globaltravelchannel.com. Now, this podcast show is about me speaking to people all across the world about their amazing travel experiences. We've had people that have done things like traveling to Antarctica, to kayak, to run marathons down there. We've had people that have sailed a dinghy around Great Britain. We've had somebody who climbs the highest mountains in the world, and the list goes on. So amazing, adventurous, but also worldly travellers come on the show and they share their travel stories. Today is no exception. I have another wonderful guest lined up, and today we're going to talk about not putting on a backpack and quitting your job and taking off around the world for a year or two. We're going to be talking about how to fit in travel trips to places in between doing a full-time job. So if you want to know more about how to do that or who's doing that, then listen to my guest today. She's got lots of fantastic tips to share. So why don't we introduce her now? Her name is Riana Ann Canning. Welcome to the show, Riana.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, dare I ask how you are today, because we were just having a chat, and let's say you're not at 100% today, are you?
No, not quite. Little sniffly, but not bad. No complaints. No major complaints.
Okay, well, I'll send over a packet of throat lozenges and see whether we can get you through today. Whereabouts
Perfect.
are you talking to us from?
So I am calling in from Prague.
Prague in the beautiful Czech Republic.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
It's one of my favourite cities. How long have you been there for?
So we moved to Prague in June of last year. So I think that's about 8-9 months, if my math is correct.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, well, we're going to talk a lot about that. I've got some lots of questions about the Czech Republic for you coming up in the show today.
Cool.
But for the sake of all of my listeners in the 94 countries around the world that we're going to today, whereabouts are you originally from?
So I'm originally from Canada, I guess, born in Vancouver, raised in Toronto, back to Vancouver. So kind of flip-flopping on the coast there. But probably spent the last 10 years in Vancouver. That's where I met my partner, and we adopted our dog, and we got our condo and all that, normal adult life stuff. And then kind of decided we weren't quite ready to settle down and that we wanted to make travel a bigger part of our lives. So last year we took the plunge and moved to Prague, and we're here for a year.
Fantastic. Well, that basically wraps up the show. You told us all about your life in 2 minutes. So let's rewind there, because
Okay.
I've got a lot of things to ask you about Canada, because I love that place, and I love having Canadians on the show, because it seems as though we're quite alike, us British Commonwealth country and folk.
Yes.
We all sort of sing from the same hymn sheet, don't we?
Yeah, I like that, definitely.
Now, the Fraser River, you know where that is, don't you?
I do, yes.
Yeah, it's not far from where you were living in Surrey. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah, I think we could, on a good day, you might even be able to see it from our window.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
So what I love to do is, because my guests come on the show and they talk about all their big travel experiences around the world, we forget to talk about the places where we actually lived or grew up in, right? And I think that's a really important thing to do, because if there might be someone sitting around the world somewhere listening to this podcast today that goes, oh, she's from Vancouver, I'd really like to know something about Vancouver. So why don't you tell us something about Vancouver before we get on to all the other stuff? So what are your top 3 travel tips for someone who's coming to Vancouver to have a visit?
Oh, good one. Definitely the best part about Vancouver is just, it's so gorgeous. You get all the, the mountains, the ocean, the parks, the beaches, you get all that, but you're also still in the city. So it's not like, you had to travel, you had to get a car, you had to drive for days and days or anything like that. Like it's right there. So honestly, the best part of Vancouver for me, just head down to, the seawall, Stanley Park, any of the beaches, just enjoy the day. You're looking up at the mountains, you're on the water, you can head to a sushi place that's just, a block behind you. Everything's right there. One of my favorite areas is called Granville Island. It's not actually an island. It's kind of more of like a little man-made peninsula, but it's super cool. There's lots of artisan shops and restaurants, great views, cool like boat houses that you can kind of admire and walk around. So really, yeah, just walking the city and admiring the whole nature meets city aspect of Vancouver. That's always been my favorite. And we get really great seafood and Asian food. So if you're, a sushi fan like I am, it's one of the best places to be.
So what would you suggest would be the best time of the year to visit Vancouver?
Ooh, that's a tough one. So we do get a lot of rain. I know we're quite famous for that. For myself, I grew up in Toronto, so the rain was a welcome change, because I always say, you don't have to shovel rain, so that's totally fine. So I would say, our summers are gorgeous. They've been a little bit hot, in recent years, just with the whole world getting a little bit hotter. So I would say sort of early or late summer, so maybe like, May or September would be a really gorgeous time to come to Vancouver. It's still sunny. It's not rainy anymore, but it's not super, super hot.
Yeah, okay, great. So those are the suggestions as far as Vancouver goes. Now I want to test you out a little bit about your hometown and see whether you know some statistics that I found out.
Okay.
What are the 3 major languages spoken in Surrey?
Oh, in Surrey, I would assume English maybe is one of them. I would think.
English is the first one, correct.
Okay, good.
You scored 10 points for that.
Maybe Punjabi. I know we have quite a large Asian population in Surrey as well.
Yes, Punjabi is number 2. Well done. You get 10 points for that.
Okay. Number 3 is going to be a toss-up. I'm not sure. Maybe just some Chinese dialect, just going with the numbers. I know there's a lot of Chinese people living in Vancouver areas.
Yeah, it's Mandarin. So Mandarin.
Oh, okay.
Mandarin and Punjabi actually make up 25% of the population. So it's a very cosmopolitan place, isn't it?
Definitely. Yeah, it's definitely a very multicultural city, and you're going to find, a lot more restaurants and shops that kind of cater to different ethnicities, not necessarily what you might expect to find in a North American city, whatever that means these days.
So you've lived in Vancouver and Toronto and then back to Vancouver again. Were you somebody that used to go out and explore the city like you were a tourist when you lived in those places, or were you someone that just got into the routine of living there day by day and did the normal stuff?
I think I probably fell into the routine a bit more. When I moved back to Vancouver, it was for university. So I was kind of really in that, university bubble. The school I went to, the University of British Columbia, it's literally off in its own little peninsula kind of from the city. So it was very easy to just stay in that bubble. You have everything you need there, shopping, restaurants, friends, parties, all that stuff. So it was the rare occasion when we're like, oh yeah, we should probably go into the city this weekend, see why we're here. So it wasn't until after I graduated that I sort of woke up to all the different neighborhoods and things that you could do in Vancouver. And then it was really only in this last year before we made the move to Prague that I was like, oh yeah, people want to come here. This is a cool place to come, and we're going to be away for, a chunk of time. So I should really take advantage of that. And we started going to the beach a lot more and walking the seawall and things like that.
Yeah, that's good, because I think a lot of people who live in a place don't really get to see it for what it's worth. They spend a lot of their time doing their daily routine, and cities tend to grow very fast. You go back to a city if you haven't been there for a couple of years, and there's so much that's changed about a place.
Yeah, definitely. And that's been kind of one of our biggest learnings. Just, I know we'll get to it, but our move here to Prague is just temporary. We're not here full time. So one thing we keep saying to each other is, hey, when we get back to Vancouver, we need to start treating it like it's the awesome place that it is, and really taking advantage of how cool it is and how much there is to do. And we think that's going to really help us sort of push off, those post-travel blues. You come back from a trip or a vacation or an extended stay and you're a little depressed, but we're going to try to look at it like, not that we're just going back, but that we're going somewhere really cool and that we have opportunities to really explore it.
Yeah, that's great. So you're not sitting over there in Prague listening to 107.7 Pulse FM back in Vancouver, eh?
No, not so much.
Now, what about podcasts? Have you been on many podcasts before?
I've been on 2 podcasts before, kind of just a little bit of a fluky. I was listening to, it's called the Expat Cast. I don't know if I'm allowed to name drop here.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, and she runs a podcast out of Germany, and she's an expat from America. So I chatted with her actually before we left before we left for Prague, kind of just talking about the packing up process and all that. And then we did a follow-up interview, just kind of how everything has gone. So I'm definitely more of a podcast listener than I am a podcast guest.
How long have you been listening to podcasts for?
Since 2015, a friend of mine introduced me to a podcast that was about a TV show that we both watched. And I was like, oh, cool. You can really, geek out on topics. So I started there and then kind of got into, everyone was on the serial bandwagon. So got into that. And then sort of realized like, hey, travel's kind of my favorite thing. Why aren't I listening to podcasts about travel? So very quickly added those to my podcast repertoire.
Yeah, cool. So when do you typically listen to a podcast? What are you doing when you listen to a podcast?
I always listen to podcasts when I'm out walking the dog. So that's a few times a day. Perfect time to listen to a podcast. And then I usually kind of keep it going. I'll walk the dog, come back in. Oh, time to make breakfast. Brushing your teeth, whatever. I don't know how to just keep the podcast running. Sometimes when I'm working, I'll listen to podcasts too. If it's kind of, just mindless work. If I'm not doing a ton of writing or anything, I like to have it in the background.
Yeah, cool. Okay. Well, one of the things that I do on my show that I think is unique to the podcast world is I actually give you, the guest, the opportunity to dedicate your show to someone special in your life. So who would you like to dedicate? Who would you like to dedicate this show to today?
I'll dedicate it to my partner, who is sick and sleeping in the other room right now. He's been, and I'm sure we'll get into it, but he's been such a rock for this whole move to Prague. His whole life is in Vancouver, his job, his friends, his family. He's had to leave all of that behind for us to have this kind of crazy year abroad. So really everything this year is just a huge thank you to him for making it possible.
Okay, well, we better tell everybody that his name is Colin.
Yes, it's Colin.
And Colin's unfortunately under the weather at the moment, so when he gets well, he can put his AirPods in and listen to his partner on the podcast show.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, I very rarely do this, but I'm going to also make a dedication for your episode today. And my dedication is going to go to Colin's father, his father that passed away, actually.
Oh,
and his name was Randy.
Randy, correct.
And one of the amazing things that I find out on my show is when I talk to my guests, I find out all about them as much as I possibly can. And quite often I come across a little gem of a nugget somewhere within their website or their blogs or whatever they are posting. And that was the same when I came across your story on love and loss, because it resonated with me about the loss of my own father and how quickly that happened. And I want you to know that your post that day has made a difference in the world.
Oh, thank you so much. That's I can't ask for anything higher than that. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that.
You're welcome. So I wanted to give you that feedback, and I thought before we get into the meat of the show today, I'll give you a couple of warm-up questions to see how you fare. Favorite TV show from the 2000s? Tell me what one and why.
So I am still watching Survivor. I don't know if you remember Survivor.
Survivor. Yeah. That was the plane crash, was it?
No, that's Lost. Survivor
that's
was
Lost.
The reality TV competition. They're stranded on the island. They have to $1 million at the end. Jeff Probst. So if you can believe it, it's going into season 40 right now.
Oh, wow.
Been on the airwaves for 20 years. So I am still watching that. And then actually in your neck of the woods, Australian Survivor is a big deal in our household. We're big fans of that as well.
Really?
Yeah. It's quite good. I don't know if you're into reality TV at all, but it's a good one.
Well, there's a lot of people down here we'd like to be lost, so maybe we can send them on the show.
Yeah,
so I'll get a lot of feedback for that, I'm sure. Now, what star sign are you?
I'm a Cancer.
You're a Cancer?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, quite unusual for a traveller. We usually get Sagittarians or Geminis as being
interesting.
most prominence. Yeah. So what's your husband?
He's Pisces.
Pisces. Okay, so he's the water sign.
Yeah.
Does he like being on water?
He does, yeah. Every time we get to the ocean, I tell him he's, a water baby, part fish. He's meant to be out there. Yeah, definitely.
Okay, cool. Okay, let's get on talking about travel. Now, what I'd like to know is, you do a travel blog today, and it's a very good travel blog, I might say. But I want to know where traveling really started for you in your life. So, can you remember back to your first overseas travel experience?
My first one, I believe it would be, we went to Disney World as a family when I was probably like 3 years old. So no firm memories of it. The only one I can kind of, see a little bit in my mind, I remember I threw up all over my dad on the plane ride down. And my parents didn't pack a change of clothes, so I had to wear like my dad's like 6'4", pretty big guy, and I was 2 or 3 or whatever it was, so I had to wear this super oversized sweater that he had packed, and I have a little memory of me walking down the plane with these super long sleeves, and that's Disney for me. That's my Disney memory.
Wow. And what about after that? When was the next big OS trip for you?
So then we went to, probably when I was about 6, we went to the Dominican Republic. That was more of just, hanging out at a resort. My dad would drop me off at the kids club kind of every day, so there wasn't a ton of travel. And then sort of my big, I guess, proper overseas trip, not that, resorts and that are not proper, but a little bit different than what we usually, discuss as travel, would have been when I was 13. I went with my aunt and her family to the Philippines and Korea for 6 weeks. And that was kind of my big one.
Fairly unusual destinations at that age, I would say.
Yeah, it was different. My mom was originally from the Philippines. She's Chinese, but from the Philippines, raised in Malaysia. It's a whole mess. She's from a little bit all over. So this aunt that I went with, her whole family was kind of back in the Philippines as well. So it was a big family trip, and then she just kind of invited me along because I had cousins kind of the similar age, and we could all hang out together. So
yeah, fantastic.
Yeah, it was awesome.
Going back to some of your overseas experience, I was reading your resume of travel basically, and I was going, wow, you've kind of zigzagged your way across the world in quite all sorts of different fashions. I'm really interested to know about, you went to Swaziland as a volunteer. Tell us about that.
I did, yes. So that was through a program at my university. They kind of had like a volunteer / course credit program that you could do. So you kind of did like an intensive course at the university for a month, and then you went off to a placement for the next 3 months. So myself and another girl, we got placed in Swaziland, and we lived there in a homestay for 3 months, volunteering at a kind of like an orphanage, but we weren't so much, with the children. We were a little bit more in the office and trying to set up programming and things like that. So definitely a very, very different experience from a lot of the other travels that I've been on.
Yeah, I bet. So what were your first impressions in going to somewhere like Swaziland? It must have been a bit of a culture shock for you.
Definitely a culture shock. I had been to some other places before, kind of in a volunteerism capacity that I'm not quite as comfortable with anymore. Knowing a little bit more about it. So the poverty and all that wasn't quite so shocking. It was different to be living in it for 3 months and having that kind of be your daily life. To the point where we didn't have water to take a bath with. You heated up water on the stove in a big bucket and brought that to the tub with you. And like, that was my life for 3 months, which is wild, when I compare it to living back in Vancouver or Toronto. It was very different, very, definitely took some adjustments, and there was, some difficulties around our volunteer placement and not, really having clear instructions from our school about, what we're supposed to be doing. So there was definitely a feeling of being a little bit lost when we first arrived. And I think it kind of took us probably that first month to really settle in until we kind of got into our groove with our host family and with our placement.
I'm interested you're talking about this because it's been a bit of a theme on my show over recent weeks. We've talked about this whole traveling to do good in the world, and last week I had a founder of an NGO who's working in Uganda on my show, and we talked about the perspective of running an NGO and what it's like to actually go from one country to another across the world, literally, to help out people What are your views on this whole volunteerism thing now that you've had that opportunity, that you've said that you've learnt a lot more about it?
Mm-hmm. It's tough. So I kind of went on a volunteerism trip right out of high school, just that summer right after graduation. I spent a month in the Dominican Republic with an organization, building schools, interacting with local communities and that sort of thing. And I'm glad I did it for the experience. And I did something similar the summer after in Peru. And then I went to actually work for a nonprofit that organizes trips like that, where they send students to build schools and that sort of thing. And I think the people who go on these sort of trips, myself included, it comes from a good place. You really do want to help. You want to put yourself in a position where you're vulnerable and you're helping, and it's not, just laying on a beach kind of vacation. And more often than not, you're paying to be a part of these trips. It's not, you're not going for free. So you are paying to volunteer and do labor and that sort of thing. But I think when you kind of look at it big picture and you study a little bit more into international development and that sort of thing, it's not a sustainable way to help, like if we want to build schools in the Dominican Republic, we're not sending 18-year-olds with no building experience, right? Like it's not, yeah. if at the end of the day, the goal is increasing education for children in the Dominican Republic, this isn't the way to do it. And it opens up, a lot of can of worms of sort of what does it look like to have, primarily white people from affluent countries coming in for 2 weeks, taking, a ton of selfies with children who, at that point, this is sort of back in the day, they didn't see digital cameras. They didn't know what that was. And what does that do to sort of their lives, to have these really transient, volunteers kind of coming in, coming out, teaching them English, leaving. There's been a lot of studies of sort of like what that sort of separation does to children who are trying to form these attachment bonds. So I think the perspective I've sort of taken on it now is, the most helpful thing to do if you really truly want to help the cause is probably to donate money, because, my money will go a lot farther than me trying to pick up a hammer and build a school. That's not my skill set. But I know that's just it's not as exciting, like it's not, it's cool to go on these trips and to say you helped and to have that, feel good moment and photos and to be able to talk about your vacation in a way that's, oh, look what I did sort of thing. It's not as cool to just send, $100 over PayPal or whatever it is and call it a day. It's tough. It's hard. And I think the point I've kind of got to now is, if you want to travel, awesome. Try not to do bad, don't harm while you're traveling. But if you do want to help, do it in ways that it's like, it's you supporting the local economy. So maybe you're going to, a little mom and pop shop, or, a nonprofit that has a cafe attached to it, and you can go and sit at the cafe and order things. You don't necessarily need to do the whole, oh, I'm going to go build a school, or I'm going to go teach English for 2 weeks and things like that. And if that is the path that you want to go down, then, make it a long-term commitment. Make sure you're with a nonprofit that's really reputable. Make sure you have skills that you're bringing in, and that there's, a partnership with the local community. And it's not just, a few white people coming in and working and then leaving.
Yeah, they're all really good points. And I guess to summarize all that, I would say that make sure you educate yourself more before you take off and do these things, and find out a lot more about the projects that you're going to go, where the money's going to, how is it going to be sustainable over time.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
Yeah, it's great that you shared that. Now, another thing that popped out of your travel resume for me was you won a trip to Australia.
I did, yes.
How did that come about?
I entered a competition online, and, just one of those silly things you see on Facebook, and you're like, nobody wins these. And I think you had to write like a little mini essay about your dream trip, and then a certain number of people were going to win their trip, or win flights for their trip. So I was like, if I'm going to write about somewhere, I'm going to write about somewhere far away. Like, I'm not going to say, my dream trip to Calgary or something like that. So I wrote about Australia, and then I won. And one of a few winners. I don't think it was, my essay wasn't, it was probably decent, but I don't think it was anything like, Pulitzer Prize worthy or anything. But yeah, I won. So I got free round trip tickets to Australia. And yeah, it was pretty cool. The timing wasn't great. I was still in university when I won, and kind of the window that you had to use it was going to be just like right during my school term. So I actually decided to take a semester and do just online courses. So I did my entire semester online, and then headed to Australia to do some backpacking for about a month, and just sort of, studied on the road.
Fantastic. So which part of Australia did you visit?
So I was up on the Gold Coast for about 2 weeks. I had a house dog sitting assignment in a little town. It's called, I think, Yamba. Yamba.
New South Wales North Coast, yeah.
Yeah, small. And then I did about a week in Sydney and a week in Melbourne. I had a friend studying there as well.
Oh, fantastic. So you got to see a little bit of the country.
Yeah, it was very cool. Can't wait to come back.
And more importantly, you got to validate that people do win those competitions.
Yes. Yeah, there's a lot of people being like, really? People win those? And I'm like, yeah, it happened.
Yeah, I was. As soon as I read it, I thought, I've got to find out about how she won this trip to Australia. This is fantastic.
Such a fluke.
Now, going now back to the other side of the world, and this is what I mean by you zigzagging all over the place. You also studied in Amsterdam.
That's right, yep.
So how long were you there for?
I was there for about 6 months. That was another travel that I did during university. Just everyone was kind of studying abroad, and my big criteria was I wanted to be somewhere where I could travel really easily. So Amsterdam totally fit that bill, kind of hopping cheap flights across Europe whenever we could.
So when you were at university, you started to have, I guess, some deep thoughts and struggles with what you were going to do with your life. Tell us about some of those things.
Yeah, it was kind of my life up until university had been very go, very goal-oriented. I was always the A+ student. It wasn't a question of, if I was going to go to university, but, which one, what, awesome thing was I going to study? I think that comes from kind of living in a little bit of a bubble, your small high school, just your friends, just your family. I was on my mom's side, I'm an only child, so kind of getting that whole like, oh, you're special, you're going to do such great things my whole life. And then you kind of get to university and you're like, oh crap, like what do I have to do? Like, it's like nobody really cares if I, come to class or do work or whatever. Figuring out things like, oh, I'm not great at math. Like that's actually a hard subject for me. So it's a lot of, sort of realizing the world's a little bit bigger than I thought, and that plan A wasn't always going to work out. Definitely feeling very lost and just not super passionate about what I was studying, what I was doing. So I remember, I think probably more in my first and second year of university, just nights when, I had a test the next morning and I couldn't bring myself to study, but I would stay up till, 2, 3 in the morning, just looking at really cool places to go online. I'd get all into research about internships in Italy or safaris in, Kenya and things like that, and just diving in. And I think it was just me trying to escape. Like I just didn't want to be in that dorm room studying for a test I didn't really care about, for, on a path I didn't really understand. So that actually led me to create my blog, because writing had sort of always been the way I did express myself and escape. And I thought, if I can't travel right now, at least I can write about it, and I can sort of try to express these feelings that I'm having.
Yeah, that's where I was heading with that conversation. I was interested to read that your blog was your place where you're able to vent and to get a lot of things out about what was going on in your life at your time. Is that the case?
Yeah, I think it wasn't quite, it wasn't like an angsty MySpace page or anything like that. But a few posts of sort of, I need an adventure. I'm looking for something that I can't find in the very tiny dorm room that I'm in. And then quite quickly it transitioned into sharing those adventures, kind of probably a month or so after I pressed publish. I met my mom in San Francisco for a little mother-daughter trip, and I actually ended up arriving a day before her. And, a day alone in San Francisco is really not that big a deal. But, when I was probably 19 at the time, that was huge. Like I had never done anything like that before. And it was so cool just to kind of, have the city to myself for a full day and make my own choices about where I was going to eat and what I was going to see and do. And that kind of really sparked like, oh yeah, like there's something out here that I need to keep exploring, that I need to keep doing.
Your blog is called Teaspoon of Adventure. I'm going to put the
Yes.
links in the show notes for
Thank
everybody
you.
to be able to check it out today. So that's how it started off. Did you then get this passion to say, right, I'm going to be a travel blogger. This is what I want to do?
No, not at all. Not at all. It was a fun little thing. I was writing. And then that summer, I ended up going on a trip to Europe. So this was 2012. It was my very first trip to Europe and my very first solo trip. It kind of happened sort of out of that same, desperation. I was back home in Toronto for the summer. I had no plans, no job, no summer courses, nothing really on my plate. And I was just, moping around the house. And then a friend of mine posted a flight deal on Facebook and it's like, oh, hey, do you know you can go from Toronto to London for like $400? I was like, no, you can't. Of course not. But I clicked into it, called the airline, and they're like, yep, that's the price. So I kind of walked into where my dad was watching TV, and I was like, could I do this? And he's like, yeah, you have nothing else going on. Why not? So booked it and ended up spending 3 weeks in Europe all by myself. I think I was, 19, turning 20. And that's kind of where the travel blog really took off a little bit more. And at that point, it was just sort of, I don't want to email my mom, my dad, my best friend. I'm just going to point them all to the same place. Like, here's the URL, figure out what I'm doing, figure out that I'm, still safe, still out here.
What a great father. Mine would have asked me about a million questions and then told me I couldn't go.
Well, I think I caught him on a commercial break of his show, so I only had so long to pitch my case before I was like, okay, get out of here.
So those early years of travel and the things that you've already talked about, Australia and Swaziland and going back to Europe and going to Europe for the first time solo, how did those experiences start to change you as a human being?
Ooh, big question. I think they definitely opened my eyes to how big the world is, because I think up until that point I had definitely just really lived in my own little bubble with, you got your 5 best friends and your family, and that's kind of it. Your whole life sort of is in there. So it definitely opened my eyes to just how large the world is and how many opportunities there are and things to do. And I remember one moment I was walking through the subway in, I think, Barcelona or Madrid, and it was, this huge tunnel, and there was tons and tons of people streaming through. And I kind of just had this thought of like, nobody knows where I am. Like, nobody back home has any clue that I'm, on this subway in the middle of Spain. And none of these people around me know who I am. And like, I felt very small and insignificant, but not in a negative way, more in just like, oh, how cool, like how big this world is, that, so much is happening and so much is going on. And there's, people I've never met before who have totally different lives that have nothing to do with me. It just really amazed me. And I think it made me want to just keep traveling and exploring and understanding more of those lives.
What did you notice about people around the world at that stage when you were meeting people for the first time in different countries? Was there a commonality that we all have as humans, or did you find everybody so different?
I think at that point I was probably looking more for the differences, just in terms of, oh, how is this different than what I do back home? Just to try to learn a little bit more. One thing I did notice is just a level of kindness that I think I've sort of found across humans in every place in the world, that there's always more people who want to help you than want to harm you. And especially, when I was 19 traveling by myself through Europe, there were some moments where I really needed help, and I felt that strangers really, really stepped up. And, you hear all these horror stories of things that happen to backpackers, especially, solo female travelers, and not to discount that. And of course, safety is a priority, but I had so much more help than I did anyone trying to scam me or harm me in any way.
Have you got a funny moment that happened to you during those trips that you can share with us?
Kind of in relation to that point, when I think I was leaving Barcelona to Madrid, or Madrid to Lisbon somewhere, and I needed to get on the metro, and my last metro ticket, it wasn't working. Like, the machine just kept spitting it back out. And at that point, I was just so frazzled. I was so stressed. I thought, I'm going to miss my next train. I'm going to get stuck here. And I just broke down crying, in the middle of this subway station. And so many people came up to me saying like, oh, what's wrong? Do you need help? Did you get mugged? What's happening? happening. You know, they're walking me over to the police station in the subway. They're offering me money. They're offering me tickets. It was just, and it was so overwhelming. Like I think I just kept crying because I couldn't handle all the people, you know, trying to help me. But it was just such a beautiful response to somebody, you know, having a human moment over something that was ridiculous. It was a metro ticket. I'm sure I could have paid $2 for a new one. But at that point, you know, I was stressed. I was frazzled. I think I ended up hopping in a cab because I just couldn't handle it anyways. But it was, that stuck with me for a lot of my travels going forward, that just the response to me, you know, breaking down crying in a subway station was just outpouring of kindness from people who didn't know me, who were so ready to, you know, buy me a ticket or help me out some way.
You know, what's fascinating about that is you can sit down today and laugh about that situation, but I'm sure when you're in the midst of that crisis in your own mind, everything was a disaster.
Yep.
But isn't it one of the greatest things about growing as a human being because of travel? We have these experiences that we probably would never have at home in our own country or in our own town, and yet it adds into that whole fervour of us and our personal development journey, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, you know, back in Vancouver, if that had happened, I understand the subway system. I know exactly what to do. I wouldn't be, you know, relying on strangers or asking for help or anything like that. So I think there's a bit of a wall, I think, when you're back home between you and strangers, just because you know what you're doing. You know, you've got your headphones in, you're going to work, you're going to wherever, and you don't really get those interactions that you might have when you're traveling and you're asking for directions or recommendations for the menu, or, you know, just, we travel a lot with our dog these days, and we get tons of people who come up and, you know, want to pet her, and just having even that, you know, a small little moment there is always really cool.
Yeah, exactly. So what about packing for your trip? So let's go back to when you were a 19-year-old and you were heading off solo to Europe. What were a couple of the things that had to go into your suitcase first of all?
So I had, at that point, I was uploading to my blog every single day. Again, it was just me letting my parents know, hey, I'm still safe. Here's what I did. So I had my giant 2012 laptop, which I'm sure was like half my suitcase. What else went in my bag? Adapters. I had a scarf that I really loved. That was my favorite travel item, and it came in handy because it was perfect for, you know, it started raining in London, so it became a little bit of a cover up. And then in Paris, you know, I had a picnic in front of the Eiffel Tower, so it became my picnic blanket. In Portugal, it was like a beach cover up, so it was kind of the most versatile item, and I think I actually ended up losing it on a train in Australia. But I always recommend people to pack a scarf just because it can do so many different things on the road.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I have to put it on my list of global travel channel travel care gear that we're going to make in the future. So
Cool.
Make sure we've got a multi-purpose scarf. I think that's a very good idea.
Yeah.
Now, you said in the beginning of the show you're currently living in Prague in the Czech Republic. So tell us the story about how that came about.
Oh boy. So sort of after all of the traveling that I did during university and a little bit after, I decided that, you know, travel was going to be a big part of my life, and I really wanted to move abroad at some point. Had kind of made a pact with my then roommate, okay, you know, by 25, we'll live in London, like we'll go do it. But then I ended up meeting my partner in 2015, and he is Vancouver born and bred. His whole family is from Vancouver, all his friends. He works in a hospital, so his job is in Vancouver. And when I met him, his passport was actually expired, which we joke is a little bit of a red flag. Like, I almost didn't say yes to the date. So I met him, and, you know, of course, not when you're expecting to meet somebody or, you know, expecting for anything to happen. And a few years later, we're, you know, buying a condo together and adopting a dog. And I just sort of thought, okay, like, I guess moving abroad isn't happening. You know, I'm stuck here. I've got my partner, I've got my dog, I've got this house, you know, it's over. But my partner, Colin, he has a big love for travel as well. It's not something that's been as big a part of his life until he met me, but we went on tons of trips together our first few years dating. And he sort of really caught that travel bug as well. So I would start to plant the seeds of like, oh, hey, do you think maybe you'd want to, you know, go work in Europe for a little while? Maybe we could find a hospital that would take you, sort of things like that. So after a few years, he finally got on board to the point where he was coming to me with like, oh, hey, I found this hospital program that does, international hires. Like, what about this? Can we do this? So we looked into a few avenues, and we were originally planning to go to the UK because they did have sort of a reciprocal hospital program that my partner could work in. But it ended up not really working out. Just the way the program works, you weren't going to find out where in the UK you were going to get placed until sort of right before you go. And that was difficult for us to try to make plans, not knowing, anywhere in the UK we could end up. It was also going to be a little bit harder to bring our dog. So we went back to the drawing board and we thought, hey, let's just look at, somewhere in mainland Europe in the EU. It'll be easier to bring the dog. My partner can't work in the hospitals, but he was happy to sort of take a customer service job or something like that for a year. So we went to the drawing board. We literally had a giant piece of paper where we wrote out all these country names and cities and comparing, is it pet friendly? What's public transit like? Is it affordable? Do they speak English? What's the job scene like? And Prague wasn't even on our list because neither of us had been here before. So we were kind of more thinking, Germany, France, Spain, Portugal. But I posted in a Facebook group for digital nomads, and I said, here's our criteria, affordable, pet friendly, all those other things. And the very first comment was, oh, have you thought about Prague? Like, Prague really fits the bill. And I was like, oh no, I had never even thought about it. So we did some research, joined some Facebook groups, watched some YouTube videos. We even watched like old episodes of House Hunters International just to kind of like get a look at what Prague housing might be. And we thought, it really sounds like it fits the bill. So let's go for it. And we, the visa that we're on right now, it's called the Youth Mobility Visa or a Working Holiday Visa. So it's a partnership that Canada has with, I think, like 30 countries all around the world. And I know Australia and the UK, they have these programs as well. And basically, if you're between 18 and 30 or 18 and 35, depending on the country, you can go and live and work in that other country for a year.
Wow, so, fantastic.
Yeah, it's super cool. And I wish I had found out about it when I was 18, because I think I would have honestly just done a program a year until I hit the cutoff. Super cool. Yeah, so that was, Canada has those programs with the Czech Republic, but also Germany, France, Spain, Portugal, the UK. So we were we were open to really anywhere that we could go. But yeah, after we found out about Prague and did our research, we decided let's take the leap. And then, applied for the visas. It was a pretty simple process, did paperwork for our dog, and then rocked up here in June 2019.
Now, I really need to ask you about the dog transit, because I got back today. I'm moving to the States shortly, and I got back today the quotation from the transport company about taking my little dog to the United States, and I nearly fell off my boat and nearly drowned with the price. But I read on your blog that you actually took your dog inside the cabin of the aircraft on the way over. Tell us about that. How does that work?
Yeah, so luckily our dog, Ellie, she's 13 pounds, I think like 5-6 kilos. So she is small enough to actually go in cabin with us. She can go in like a little carrier and just go down by our feet. And that was a big one for us. We knew if that wasn't an option, it was going to be a lot more difficult to bring her over cost-wise. And then also just, she's a little bit anxious as a dog, so we didn't want to try to put her, in the cargo. So that was actually one of the reasons that the UK got cut off of our list, because you can't fly into the UK with a dog in cabin. They always have to go in cargo, doesn't matter their size. And we knew that would be really, really stressful on her and, on our wallets as well. So luckily with flying into the EU, she was able to come in cabin with us. So we flew from Vancouver to Paris, and we just added her as like basically you pay a little pet fee. I think it was like 90 Canadian dollars.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's super affordable. And then she just takes the place of one of your carry-ons. And it worked out great. We actually ended up having an extra seat on the flight, so we got to like bring her up to the seat. She stayed in the carrier, it was easier for her, she feels comfortable in there, but we didn't have to like lose leg room or anything like that, just because there was extra space.
So how long is it Vancouver, Paris? That must be about 10 hours, is it?
Yeah, I think between 9 and 10. Yeah, so it's quite a long time. She did so well. She didn't cry at all. She didn't have any accidents. We weren't sure how she was going to do. We've never flown with her before, but she did amazing.
Is this airline specific, or do most airlines do this?
I believe most do. We flew with Air Transat, but I've heard like KLM, Lufthansa, Air Canada, WestJet, like a bunch of the airlines do it. It's sort of similar pricing. I think we just flew Air Transat because that seemed to be I think it was probably the cheapest and the one that offered a direct flight between Vancouver and Paris.
Yeah, right. So you've been in Prague now since June of last year, summertime. So you arrived in the summertime. That must have been a great time of the year to arrive.
Yeah, it was interesting because it was so busy. And Europe in the summer is madness. I remember our first week, we were running around figuring out internet and cell phones and banking and all that. And then at the end of our first week, I was like, hey, we haven't even seen, the astronomical clock or Charles Bridge, the things that, Prague is known for. When you Google image search Prague, like that's what comes up. I was like, okay, we got to go see those. So it was at the end of our first week. It was like 10 p.m. We're like, oh, we'll go out now. There's no way anyone will be there. And it was packed. Like it was like shoulder to shoulder full of people. And I was like, oh my God, like I'm never coming back here. This place is the worst.
Yeah.
And we've been back to that sort of Old Town area since. We spent some time there in January and it was a lot better. But that first time I was like, whoa, there's a lot of people here.
So a lot of people listening would be really fascinated about the process in terms of, getting to a place, because I've spoken to a lot of digital nomads on my show and they've talked about this desire that they have now to travel to less number of countries and to base themselves somewhere for a longer period of time and to get settled in. Did you do a lot of that planning about, getting an apartment and all that stuff before you left Canada, or how much did you wait until you got on the ground in the Czech Republic?
Yeah, I did a ton of research and planning before we left. I'm the spreadsheet girl. Like, I've got tons of Google Docs and tabs and whatnot open at any time. So I had this huge to-do list for us before we left, and I did a ton of research. The best way that I found was actually to join Facebook groups that are, called like expats in Prague or Prague expats or things like that, and just sort of go right to the source of like, hey, here are other people who moved to Prague from another country. What are they talking about? So I joined those groups a few months before we arrived and learned all sorts of things about, what banks are the best, which phone company, how to set up internet, where even like things like, where to go for a haircut, what's the best vet, things like that. And we actually found our apartment through a Facebook group a couple months before we arrived, which was really helpful.
What were some of the things that you might have overlooked that you wish you had done differently before you left home?
I think in terms of the actual like logistics and planning here in Prague, that part I actually feel pretty confident with all the research that we did. We kind of hit the ground running, and within the first like 2 days of being here, we had cell phone, internet, bank, all that sorted out. That all went super smoothly for us. The part that I do wish we had done a little bit more thinking and planning on is actually our situation, like what we were planning to do in terms of like work and life and travel. So like I said, my partner Colin, he wasn't going to be able to keep his hospital job here in Prague. Just, he doesn't speak Czech. His certifications wouldn't have transferred over. So our original plan was that he would get a customer service job. So he ended up getting one super quick. He was working in a hotel, not a hospital. And that was great. And we were like, okay, cool. Like he's got his, job at the hotel. I'm still working online. And then we realized, oh, hey, our whole purpose of coming to Prague was to be able to, experience the city, but also travel around Europe as much as possible. And we really can't do that if he's working, a 9 to 5 days a week. So that was stressful for us. The first few months, we kind of just went on 1 or 2 little weekend trips here or there. And I was really not happy with that. Just, we didn't give up our lives in Vancouver to just be able to go, as far as you can go on the train in a weekend. So really just within, a 2-3 hour radius of Prague. So we ended up coming to the decision sort of, I think 2 or 3 months into our journey that Colin would actually leave his job at the hotel and then be helping me out a little bit with some of my online clients, as well as kind of just taking over some more household duties. So like he does all the cooking, all the grocery shopping, and things like that. Yeah, so it's been a big transition, and it's been, kind of, we were talking about it the other day, it's sort of afforded us the highest highs and the lowest lows of this year, because it's been stressful to sort of, I'm now the breadwinner of the family. I need to really make sure I'm hustling with my work. And, sometimes Colin doesn't feel like he has as much purpose or as much value. But it's also afforded us, we've been able to go on so many more trips and things since he's decided to leave his job. It's really given us a lot of freedom, and we've been able to travel with, friends and family who come and visit. So I think it was the best decision. I wish it was something we had talked about a little bit more before we got to Prague, and then we could have, maybe come up with some more plans about how we were going to make it work.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, but I think all the same, I think in terms of these situations that you find yourself in where you actually have to work as a couple and get through by creating the teamwork around coming up with solutions. And, these days when I say we, I'm talking about us men, we're quite acceptable for women as they should be, having the capacity to earn their own income and support families and using that different dynamic, I guess, in the couple relationship, right, than what we might have seen 30 or 40 years ago. Mm-hmm. So I think in terms of what you've just described is something that can obviously bring a couple a lot closer together to work in that team environment because of the situation you find yourself in. Has that been the case in your situation?
Definitely, yeah. I mean, we went from Colin would work, 8 hours at the hospital, commuting there and back for an hour each way. So, he's gone 10 hours of the day, to now we literally spend 24/7 together. Like, we are in the house side by side every minute. So in terms of that closeness, like we have the physical closeness, but then I think it also has given us a chance to sort of grow closer, I guess, more in a emotional or mental way as well. We're having harder conversations about, what it looks like when one of us feels overwhelmed or not needed or that sort of thing. So it's definitely been, and we kind of thought it would be coming into this year in Prague, that this would sort of be a year to really, strengthen our relationship and challenge it. And it definitely has been.
Yeah, okay, good. Now, a lot of people are sitting there waiting for me to ask you this question. How's Ellie settling into Prague?
She loves it. She's very, we
joke. Has she picked up the language yet?
No, she has not, and neither have we. So not her fault there. But we always joke that Ellie's like the most adaptable. Even when we were back in Vancouver, if we'd go to like a hotel or something like that, she settles in right away. She finds her favorite pillow. She's like, yeah, I'm home. I'm here. I'm happy. So she's, right away, as soon as we got here, she was super comfortable.
And is there anything different from a dog perspective in Prague than the rest of the world in terms of a dog's more friendly in Prague or more vicious or what?
The dogs themselves seem to be super friendly. There's a lot of off-leash dogs. We notice a lot of the locals don't bother leashing their dogs here. Right. But it's a super dog-friendly city, which we were so happy about. So our apartment is dog-friendly, and then just the city itself, they have these little stations that have like free poop bags, for lack of a nicer word, but they're all over the city. These just totally free bags that you can use to scoop your dog's stuff. And you can bring your dog into restaurants and banks and shops, and nobody cares. They usually bring a little bowl of water over. It's so nice. It's so great. It's such a good city for having a dog.
Yeah, fantastic. I hope everybody in Australia is listening to that, because there's a lot of problems around getting dogs more friendly and accepted in this country at the moment. So three great lessons that you've got for us about shifting country to go and live with your family in a different part of the world. What are your three top tips for people listening in today?
My first one would be to definitely do your research, and again, those expat Facebook groups are such a good resource. So many people to connect with there, asking questions, going through the exact same issues that you have. My second tip would be to just have as many conversations as you can with whoever you're moving with, partner, children, whatever, ahead of time. But also, sort of to your point, there's going to be a lot of learning and changes sort of in the moment, but at least sort of prepping yourself for that. Like, oh, hey, you know, this part's going to be challenging for us. How do we want to get through it? And having those conversations that are a little bit more, not so much the logistical things, but more the emotional side of, you know, how you're going to deal with big changes. And my third tip would be, I guess, to kind of think, to prioritize the reason why you're here. So for us, the big reason was to explore Prague and the rest of Europe as much as we can. So anytime, you know, we have a hard decision, that's kind of what we come back to. We're like, okay, you know, does that help us explore more of Prague or explore more of Europe within reason? You know, of course, we're not trying to spend our whole life savings, you know, in this 1 year. But sometimes we do make the choice that's probably not the most financially responsible, but sort of saying, hey, we're only here for a year. When else are we going to be able to, you know, jump on a train and be in Austria in 4 hours or something like that? So yeah, it's just sort of saying yes to those opportunities when maybe before you would have said no.
Did you leave Vancouver with a plan B in place in case things didn't work out the way that you expected?
Not really. That was kind of the other big scary part about saying yes to the Czech Republic, because the visa that we're on is country specific. We weren't like stuck in Prague, but we kind of knew if we wanted to have, you know, a big English speaking community and at that point a job opportunity for Colin, that Prague was kind of our best bet. There's not really another city in the Czech Republic that would offer those same opportunities. So it was kind of like Prague or bust. Like if Prague didn't work out, we could apply for another youth mobility visa, you know, in Germany or France or wherever. It's easier to do it from Canada, I've heard. So we'd probably end up coming back. And I think if we did come back, we'd probably just say, hey, let's table this for another year, try again in a year. And I don't know if we would have maybe lost momentum at that point and just not bothered. So luckily, Prague has worked out pretty great.
So what are the things that you're really enjoying about Prague?
The low cost of living is great. It's about half the cost of living in Vancouver, which is how we're able to do it kind of on one salary, really. So that's been just awesome. I love the architecture, like, you know, just walking the dog and looking around and seeing these buildings that are hundreds and hundreds of years old and cobblestone and beautiful facades and all that. It's not something you see in Vancouver ever. So that's been really cool. Lots of great green spaces and definitely in the summer, there's really a culture of, you know, living outside and beer gardens and festivals and events and things like that. That's been really cool. Unfortunately, we haven't learned a ton of the Czech language, so, you know, we don't really have local friends, but have been enjoying exploring as much of the local culture as we can, you know, going to museums or restaurants and things like that. So that's been really fun as well.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that in terms of, you know, meeting people, making friends, and that you found that to be a bit difficult, have you?
It's been a bit of a challenge. We met some cool people sort of right off the top, actually through those expat Facebook groups, and that's sort of been our bigger source of friendship has been fellow expats. And I think it's easier, to be honest. You know, it's people who speak English, who kind of understand, if not where you're coming from, you know, maybe they're not Canadians, but at least understand sort of some of the hardships of moving to Prague and being a bit of an outsider. So we've got some friends from, like, you know, Amsterdam or Australia or India, things like that. And those have been more the people that we've connected with. And then I think just because we're only here for a year and because we are traveling kind of like crazy, it's even been hard to maintain some of those relationships. You know, I'm part of a freelancers expat group, and we get together once or twice a month to, you know, co-work or go out for drinks and that sort of thing. And I've had to miss so many of those just because we have travel plans. So it's a little bit hard to keep those relationships going.
So what does the future look like when you get back to Vancouver? Is there going to be a plan to go and live somewhere else in the world, or are you going to put your roots down now and sit down there for a while?
I kind of think my life is never going to be fully rooted. Like, I can't see myself, you know, buying a house and being in that same house for 20 years or something like that. I think our current plan is when we get back to Vancouver, we're hoping to still keep our apartment in Surrey rented out, and that we ourselves will move sort of more back into the heart of Vancouver, which I think is going to be a really fun way to sort of come off this year in Prague, where we have been more central in the city and still have those great options back in Vancouver. We're not going to feel as, you know, stuck out in the suburbs or anything like that. And then we're planning, we want to go back to Asia in the fall, do a little trip there. I don't know that we'll ever do another youth mobility visa situation, but we do have plans sort of in the faraway future, when we have children, we really want to travel with them and sort of take advantage of, parental leave and do some traveling then and, give our children that kind of experience of traveling the world and meeting new people and hearing languages and living outside of that bubble that Colin and I kind of felt that we were raised in.
Yeah, right. Well, listen, we've rushed through our time today. It's been great to hear your entire travel journey and what's got you to, well, not only you, but Colin and Ellie as well, into the city of Prague. And I'm going to actually introduce you to some good friends of mine that live in Prague because first of all, they're Czech people, but they speak great English, and they'll be able to help you out in a lot of different areas.
Cool.
So
Thank you.
I'll make sure I do that when I finish the show with you today. But Riana, it's been great having you on the Global Travel Channel podcast show. Thank you for sharing your thoughts around volunteerism, about solo backpacking into Europe as a 19-year-old. Kudos to your dad to letting you go and exploring the world. I think that's something that every father should let his daughter do, and get out there and see the world. And also a big shout out for Colin, because it sounds like he's been Mr. Compromise on a lot of this journey. He's there by your side, although he's in bed at the moment, sick. So please pass on my best regards and hope he gets well very, very shortly.
I will. Thank you so much for having me and letting me ramble about about everything.
No, it's great. And as I say, I'm going to put your blog URL into the show notes so everybody listening to the show today can check out your fantastic work online, and you'll get more than you bargained for with Riana, because she really shares her heart and soul on a blog, and there's some great posts there that you should all read. So I'm going to recommend that.
Thanks so much.
Okay, Riana, well, all the best and have a great weekend ahead.
Thanks. Same to you.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was Riana Ang Canning talking to me today from Prague in the beautiful Czech Republic, and sharing her story from being a solo traveller as a young girl going around the world and even winning a prize to go to Australia as a part of a competition, to ending up being with her husband and now moving to Prague to live for a year, and talking about some of the challenges associated with that. I hope you enjoyed that episode. A lot of useful information if you're out there and you're thinking about travelling to somewhere to live for a while. There's always lots of different angles and different ways that you can do it. Now, if you're looking for more episodes from the Global Travel Channel podcast show, all you need to do is head over to our website at www.globaltravelchannel.com. You'll find over 100 episodes of entertaining, inspiring and motivating interviews of people that are doing amazing travel experiences across the world. If you want to download our podcast, you just need to go to places like Apple iTunes under the podcast section, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Google Play, and even our Patreon page under the Global Travel Channel. So there you go. There's a host of places you can get hold of it. And don't forget, if you love our show and you think the content's really good, why not tell someone about it? We're trying to grow our listenership across the world. So if you tell your family, your friends, even your work colleagues about this great podcast you listen to, I would be very grateful for that. Okay, well, that's it for this particular episode. My name is Mark Philpott, and until we meet again next time, I want to wish you all a very happy and safe bon voyage.